Constance Ibsen, and I'm the Vice President of the Hood Canal Improvement Club. And this club-sponsored community forum is on biosolids, or as we call it, septic land application site, up off McCready and Webb Hill. I think most of you in here know where the site is. The Hood Canal Improvement Club has been in existence since 1928. It is to connect the residents with the resources so that we can solve problems that the community has identified. Also here tonight supporting this forum is the Lower Hood Canal Watershed Coalition. It's been around since the beginning of the 1990s, and it has also had this particular site as an issue since about 1993-94. The mission of the coalition is to protect and improve the ground, surface, and marine waters of the Hood Canal watershed. Okay, Peter is first.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight to discuss BioRecycling. It's a corporation's North Ranch land application, biosolids land application site. So I'm going to start here by my name is Peter Lyon. I'm the regional manager for the Waste to Resources program at the Department of Ecology in the Southwest region. The Southwest region is 12 counties, mostly on the western side of Washington State. My role is I signed the permit, but I'm not the technical expert. I brought 3 technical experts with us today, and we'll start with Kelsey. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Kelsey Dunn. I'm one of the Southwest Regional Biosolids Coordinators.
Rebecca.
I'm Rebecca Singer, and I'm the statewide biosolids coordinator.
And I'm Eugene Radcliffe, and I'm the hydrogeologist for the Waste to Resources program in the Southwest Regional Office. And thanks for having us here today.
Okay. So I have kind of developed a very loose agenda here, inputting times, because I'm not really sure, how much time we're going to spend on each topic. But I think that we decided that we would request that you hold your questions till the very end, and then we'll have a question and answer session on any of the topics we'll cover. Because the only reason why we're asking you to do that is we think it's likely that we may end up covering something you'll have a question about at the beginning. So, and this is sort of the order. I'll cover the issue as we understand it from your perspective, and I'll tell you what we believe the issue to be, a site history and an agreed order. Kelsey, I think, will do the background, and Rebecca will do, and Eugene will do a combination of some hydrology, groundwater issues, as well as sort of go over the aspect consulting report. And then I'll probably do a quick next steps, and then we'll all together answer any questions anyone has. Hopefully this works out. Great. So this is a map of the site. I think we are probably at the moment somewhere right up here. Is that about right? Mm-hmm. I think the site is approximately 4 or 5 miles southwest of where we're currently located. About 280 acres. Does that sound right, Kelsey? So it's right here. I think it's owned by Green Diamond Corporation, the land, and I think that Kurtz. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And BioRecycling has leased this land. Leases the land from them. So the issue. I know historically, at least I believe historically, the issue was a concern about dissolved oxygen in the Hood Canal, and I came to this job in 2008, and at the time they had just concluded some aspect consulting phase 1 and phase 2 studies, and I think what I was told was that the concerns from the community and ecology, water resources folks, and the Virus 17, I believe, was that perhaps this site was contributing nutrients to the Hood Canal, causing part of the dissolved oxygen problem. And various parties, the county, ecology, various folks, brought together with some money and paid for aspect consulting to do an investigation on this site and kind of characterize the groundwater, the direction of the groundwater, the flow of the groundwater, and some of those things. And what I think that we learned when I read the result of the report is that the water doesn't flow towards the Hood Canal. It flows towards, in some part, towards Snohomish. And Eugene will go over this in detail, but you can see kind of where the way the water flows when Eugene has some maps. But the studies did determine, if it wasn't already known, I know it does one in the studies, that there are groundwater nitrate issues at this site. And there's also excessive soil nitrogen. We believe in the top couple feet of the soil layer that due to years of nutrient loading, the grasses, the pasture grasses, have developed an extraordinarily thick layer of roots, and the organic nitrogen is really contained there. So I got this information, or this information was indirectly, I think, from a Mason County solid waste site, because initially, back in the 80s, this was permitted by Mason County under solid waste as all sewage sludge was at the time. And according to the report, it said that was in 86. I think Solganic might have been a precursor of the present day BioRecycling. Not 100% positive, but I think that's the way it worked. I think the owner-operator was affiliated with both companies. And in 1982, they became BioRecycling. In 1998, I think our legislature basically authorized a rule for biosolids at 7095J. Does that sound right?
Correct.
That's the statute. In 99, the first permit application must have been submitted by BioRecycling. The way we manage and regulate biosolids in the state of Washington is under a general permit. That means we issue a singular permit every 5 years. And anybody who wants coverage underneath that submits an application to the Department of Ecology for our review and potential coverage. It must have been granted. We reissued the general permit again in 2005. I think in 2007 is when that, Water 16 group, it says, started the aspect consulting studies in 7 and 8. And as a result, I got the job in 2008, and we were looking at the aspect consulting information, and we agreed that there was a groundwater problem with nitrates, and so we approached the owner-operator of BioRecycling, Mr. Roger Hickey, and about our concerns, and we talked about potential pathways or ways to resolve that. And when he quickly agreed with us to take an agreed order approach. The department has a couple of regulatory mechanisms, one of which is what's just called a unilateral order. We just basically issue a directive to a permittee. It tells them that they must do something that way and do something a certain way. And they in turn can appeal that order, and it can become a litigious process. Mr. Hickey, I remember meeting with him in an office room in the Ecology building, and he immediately acknowledged the concerns due to groundwater, and he expressed a desire to go for an agreed order instead, which means he waived his right to win the appeal, but essentially he worked with Ecology over the next month or two to sort of identify what we felt was a pathway to kind of resolve the issue, and so that was signed in February 2009. At that meeting, that first meeting with Roger in 2009, I remember the first thing, or one of the very first things he said to us was, he owned a facility in Pacific, Washington. It's a town on the border of Pierce and King County. And I think about 15 million gallons of septage was received at that site and then hauled to the North Ranch site. BioRecycling refers to it as North Ranch versus Webb Hill, which I think locals do. And they would haul it here. And I think Roger told us, as I recall, that he had shut down the Pacific facility. I think it had been fairly recently opened within a year or two, or fairly recently from that date. And but the first thing he said to us, he says, "I'm shutting that down. I've laid the people off." This was early December. He goes, I want to decrease the impact on this site, and that was his first step. And frankly, at Ecology, we thought that was a pretty significant step. They took other steps over the years in response to the order as well. In around 2011, I'm kind of guessing at March, we'll go over this in the other presentations, but the material comes into the site, it's basically treated with lime, and then it's stored in these large containers. And around that time, after decreasing the volume from 31 million gallons to 15 by shutting Pacific, they started allowing the material to sit in these large tanks for periods of time, and essentially gravity takes over. The solids, the heavy nutrients part settle to the bottom, and the liquid component would go, float to the top. And they would, I believe the way I understand is they would take the liquid material and apply that, and the solids, I think, were being then truck hauled to a facility that they have down in Centralia or other facilities. And it was a step, again, to further reduce the nitrogen loading on the site. Off-site monitoring wells were installed shortly thereafter. I think that Mr. Hickey was concerned about the nearest down gradient private wells. So we had a conversation, and the way our communication with Mr. Hickey's largely been is we talked about it, and he said, hey, I want to install these. I don't want to have my site impact these people's drinking water wells. So he did install them, and he's been monitoring them quarterly ever since. And frankly, I don't think we've ever seen a value over maybe 2 or 3 milligrams per liter on the off-site wells.
Yeah.
The standard, the state and federal standard is 10 milligrams per liter. In around 2014, but the problems persisted with groundwater. So in 2014, BioRecycling initiated further dewatering. I think that's when they built or they purchased this piece of equipment. It's a belt press. And they add chemicals, this stuff called polymers, and it thickens the solids, and the effluent flow would go through there after it had been treated with chlorine and lime to kill nutrients, or pathogens rather, I'm sorry. It would then thicken it, and the solids would be removed, and this was another step to reduce the nitrogen loading of this site. And they have a press that does that, and I think I heard today, we visited on the way here, that they can remove about 28% solids, or they get the solids very cake-like, as a result of this process. And then when we saw it there today, they just bought another piece of equipment. I think it's called a diffuser, and it's another way to further remove the solids from the material that eventually gets land applied. Our discussion here was that the material that they're land applying to the site at this point resembles very much to be water, and very much less biosolids. So over the 7 years since the agreed order with BioRecycling was signed, they've taken a varieties of steps that were significant steps, expensive steps, complicated steps, and unfortunately none of them have quite resolved their fundamental issue. But I just wanted to be noted that although they've been unfruitful, that they certainly haven't been without. They've tried and been sincere. Most recently, we're at a point where there's a new permit cycle. The permit was issued, I think, in the fall of 2015. BioRecycling had until the spring to submit to us an application, some other documents, and as part of that, they submitted a plan to change the way that they run their agriculture at this site. Previously, it was just a pasture grass. I think at times they had cut and removed hay, but many times I think they were just grazing cattle. Now that they've introduced alfalfa on certain fields, with an attempt that they will pull the entrained organic nitrogen out of the soil, and so there's a variety of other agricultural changes that they're implementing this year, and that is part of the current application and under the permit, which we are now in the permitting process of. So this will be something that will be available for folks to eventually comment when we get to that point. Have a public meeting. The agreed order, this is just to summarize that was signed back then. They were required to submit and update a permit application, submit proposed agronomic rate calculations for each field. I don't know if there's 8 fields or 11 fields, there's a number of fields there. They basically predict how much nitrogen a site needs, the field needs based on the crop, and it's pasture grass, and I want to say 120 pounds of plant available nitrogen. They were given some targets. They predict how much they're going to apply. At the end of the year, we require them to do some soil sampling, and that soil sampling is supposed to predict or tell us whether the prediction at the beginning of the year was roughly accurate, and we gave them some targets and ranges. And so they started off being at 20% of the targeted agronomic rate, and at some point we changed it to 40 pounds per acre in the top foot of the soil and 60 pounds in the bottom second foot of the soil. It should be noted that I don't believe that they've actually been able to meet their target as of today. They are required to sample the material that they land apply for metals and I think for nutrients as well, and pathogens. And so they do surface and groundwater monitoring. Eugene will get into it, but there's a number of groundwater monitoring wells, a lysimeter, and there's some surface water that they sample quarterly, and they do an annual report on. The overall goal of this whole approach was to get at least 2 consecutive years where the acceptable, that all end of the year soil nitrogen, soil analysis, we get that the nitrates in the soil matched what we would expect after the plant and uptake the most of the nutrients that they applied over the course of the year within the form of biosolids. And unfortunately, that's yet to occur. So the next person to give a presentation will be Kelsey.
I'm going to discuss, I reviewed their annual reports for the last handful of years, and I'm going to discuss the information that was provided.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, when I get nervous, I get quiet. I'm going to discuss the information that was provided by the facility in their annual report. This is a report that all facilities are required to submit on an annual basis. And so it's good for us because we can see what's changing from year to year. I'll discuss generally how biosolids are regulated, what makes a biosolid be able to be land applied, and how biorecycling meets that. So, and I just wanted to lay out some of the terminology we might use in the presentation. So biosolids are, it's sewage sludge to what most people commonly think of it as, but biosolids are what it's called when it's able to be land applied, or presumably will be able to be treated to be able to be land applied. We only consider it sewage sludge if it can't meet those standards and, for example, is going to be sent to a landfill. And then septage is material from septic tanks, portable toilets, RVs. It can be some grease trap waste, but that's limited. And septage can be either treated to septage standards or as biosolids. So they're, in the case of biorecycling, they treat all the incoming septage as to biosolids standards for land application. So to meet the requirements for land applications, it's three faceted regulatory requirements. The first is they have to do the pollutant monitoring that Peter mentioned. These are the 9 pollutants all facilities are required to monitor for. They're required for various reasons, whether they're potential human toxins, animal toxins, plant toxins. The pathogen reduction. So you may have heard of Class A versus Class B biosolids. Some facilities, like the city of Shelton, produces Class A. That's because the degree with which they reduce the pathogens is so great that they meet that threshold to be able to distribute to the general public. Class B has the pathogens are reduced slightly less, still very significant. And the further reductions in pathogens is considered to happen in the field, the UV light, the temperature, the soil microbes, and that's one of the reasons that Class B biosolids are only applied on sites, permitted sites that have restricted public access. There's restrictions on when cattle can graze, how long cattle can be put on the site after application, how long it can be after the crop is harvested, those kind of things. So the way biorecycling, there's a number of approaches that facilities can take for meeting these standards. And in biorecycling's case, they add lime until the material reaches a pH of 12, and they hold it for 2 hours. The third standard that facilities must meet for land application is called vector attraction reduction. This is a difficult concept, can be a difficult concept to explain. It's somewhat can be correlated with how odorous a material is, but the concern is how attractive is it to things that are likely to come and spread disease. Flies, birds, dogs. It has to be stable, is a word we use. And there again, this is a requirement that has multiple options for how to meet that standard. And biorecycling meets this standard by also maintaining the pH for an additional 22 hours on top of the initial 2 hours at 11.5 pH. And that's something they report every year in their annual report. Each facility, how are you meeting the standards? And then they'll provide their data. So one of the other aspects, pieces of information we ask for from facilities is, who else's biosolids are you receiving? What other facilities are sending you their material for further treatment? Historically, you can see that biorecycling has received material from multiple local facilities for further treatment. These facilities either aren't able to meet Class B or for land application, or it's not something that's economically viable for those facilities. And these are other wastewater treatment plants that also have permit coverage under the biosolids permit. And this is in conjunction with the septage that they're receiving. So on average, over the last 5 years, BioRecycling has received 15.4 million gallons per year. And I estimate that that's 12 to 15,000 households worth of septage on an annual basis. And Peter touched on this. Some of these are from these boxes represent the, some of these boxes represent some of the historical timeline that Peter mentioned. I guess I'll explain what this is. So this is the amount of material BioRecycling has applied at this North Ranch site over this time span. In biosolids, we refer to the solids in dry tons because then we can, make what Shelton is producing at 90%, 98% solids equatable to the city of Woodland, who's producing 2% biosolids. So the numbers, we can equate those two to each other. So in terms of dry tons, BioRecycling has reduced a total of 91% application on an annual basis since 2006. And Peter talked about when the groundwater was discovered to have high nitrates, that Roger made the decision to shut down the plant, when the agreed order was signed, when they implemented solid settling, when they started with their belt filter press dewatering, and then the amount after a full year of belt filter press use.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the hydrogeology of the site. Which button was it?
The arrow?
Oh, there. There we go. So this is a cross-section of an area just a little ways north of the site, but it pretty much describes the geology of the area. And so, as you can see on the top layer up here, oops. So these areas right here are the upper aquifer, or alluvial aquifers. And this area is quite thin across the top of the site, and typically no more than about 5 feet. Below that is what we call an upper confined unit, which is composed mainly of tills and clays and are quite dense, and the permeability, the ability for water to move through those materials is quite reduced from the aquifers. So they tend to separate aquifers, and they don't have a great deal of permeability. And then the wells that we'll be talking about, where we've gotten some samples, occur down here in this the middle aquifer. This is just kind of show you where the site is in relation to the area. I like to show this slide. It kind of shows the surface landforms, which are indicative of what you would see with a continental glacier coming across and moving across the area. And you can see oops, boy. And I'm having a problem with that. Okay, there it is. You can see the lineations, which are indicative of the glaciers coming through the area here. And these ridges here are going to be quite high, somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 feet in topography. And it's mostly materials that are ground up underneath the base of a glacier and just kind of spread out. This is a kind of unique view of the site that we're talking about. And it's an oblique view, but I like this, and we're looking to the southwest. And just so you know, the groundwater general direction is this way also to the southwest. But I like this because it shows the surface, how everything kind of just goes to the center of the property, and you can see this small little valley down here. And then we have our monitoring wells. Our on-site monitoring wells are these areas right here. And then we have some monitoring wells down along here to look at what's happening off the property. Again, this is another cross section, and when we were looking at the that last photo, we were kind of looking this way through here. So this is that valley down in here, and this is monitoring well 1, and that's this area right in here. And you can kind of see how it's kind of contained in there. And then this section right through here is this section right here, and it's kind of moving down slope. And this is the high side of the site. This is a slide I found online with the National Resource Conservation Service. So it talks about different applications for the types of soils that you would find in the area. And when you look at the slide, you can see that it's the coloring there. That whole area there means that the soils are somewhat limited for the type of application that we're looking at. However, that doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you have to do certain things in order to make sure that you're not over using that particular soils for that type of application. And then this is the ground level view of the site, and this is towards the center of the site, I believe. And this is during the wet season, so you can kind of see that, you know, when the water, when it rains and then they land applicate, it kind of all comes down towards the center. And the reason why it kind of ponds like this is because what I was telling you about with the tills underneath. The tills are, like I said, impermeable, so the water goes into the soils much quicker than it can go through the tills. And so it kind of just has, it's like a dam, it just kind of ponds there until it can kind of drain out or evaporate. And another aspect of the till is that, you know, it can be fairly dense and fairly continuous, or it can be discontinuous. And I don't know if you're familiar or watched Price is Right and you see the Plinko game. Well, you know, water can kind of move down through tills like that at a very slow rate. So that's just to give you kind of an idea of the geology that we're talking about here. And
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Aspect report. So Aspect Consulting was asked to come in 2007 to look at the site. What they really needed to do was look at the wells. So they did not only some of the geology, which Eugene presented to you, but they also took samples from multiple wells on the site to determine if there was any nitrate issues. So that, Kelsey already talked about that. Phase 1 of the study looked at 4 different monitoring wells. So you've got monitoring well 3, let me make sure because they're awfully tiny on this screen.
that's 4.
There's monitoring well 3, number 2 is over here, 1, and number 4. So I'm sorry, they looked at the 4 monitoring wells. And they did this just once, however, so keep in mind that they're only testing these at one point. So they didn't take tests of these wells over a period of time, nor did they do it seasonally. So from those first results, and this did not show up well at all, so I apologize. it shows up perfect right there, but it does not show up perfect here. So their nitrate results are on this line here, and you can at least see the numbers. So monitoring well number 1 was the highest at 13.3 milligrams per liter. They took a blind duplicate, and that came back at 14.1. So this is a well that really showed the highest concentration of nitrate. And keep in mind, again, the groundwatering rule for Washington State says that the limit is 10 milligrams per liter. So this well is above that. The next well of concern was well number 4, and it is at 9.78. So it's right below that limit threshold. So that one is one to definitely monitor for. But what I do want to show you is, again, so here's well number 1, which is in that depression, and well number 4. So the direction the water is moving is this direction. And so it makes sense that if you're going to see high nitrate levels, it's going to be in this depression area. So at the end of that report, they decided that they needed to add more monitoring. So they wanted monitoring of potable water about 3,000 feet down gradient from the site. Also, further examination of the groundwater flow, because at that point they really hadn't determined exactly where the groundwater flow is going. And then they wanted to install 2 additional monitoring wells down gradient in addition to the 4 that were already on site. So they brought in a phase 2 study which occurred in 2008. And in that study, I want to make sure that I'm pointing to the right ones because again, the screen is really hot or blurry. So monitoring well number 5 is over here, 7 is right here, and 6 is here. So to put that in perspective, again, we've got the 1 or 2, 3, 1, 4, and then they added these 3 additional wells here. Okay, lovely. This was even better than the last one. All right, so in this one though, what I can tell you is, again, monitoring wells 1 and 4 came back with higher numbers. And then in this one, monitoring well number 5 came back with a high number. It was at 11. So that one is just right at the baseline of the target of 10. And let's go back in. So again, here's the stream flow of this. So monitoring well 5 is kind of down gradient, but it may be because of this again, depression, because here's where you saw that it kind of bowls there, and then the depression moves this direction. So again, it's just how the water is flowing underground due to these naturally occurring depressions within that area. So what they found was, again, 5, oh, sorry, I got those reversed. 6 was at 11, 5 was at 4. So the 4 is a little concerning because it's getting above there. You want to see things under 1 typically if you're using wells, especially for drinking water. These aren't drinking water wells, however, so the threshold can be, as long as you're under 10, then you're okay. But again, they really stress further monitoring, and BioRecycling has been doing that quarterly for us, and then they submit all of their reporting on an annual basis. So.
So some of the next steps, I mentioned this earlier, Ecology issued its latest iteration of the general permit in September, which meant BioRecycling basically had 180 days to submit to us a permit application. They did so. The permit application involves a number of pieces. I think I might have listed them here. There's an application form itself. There's a SEPA checklist. We asked SEPA, BioRecycling, to complete a new checklist. I think the previous one had been done in the 80s. And we felt that the operations had changed enough over the years, it was time to review that. A site-specific land application, she said a land application plan there. It's basically sort of, I don't know, a how-to, how they're going to perform business at this site moving forward. And so we have that in our possession. The next part of this will be public notice for both the application as well as for SEPA. That's in the near future. I am the SEPA official in this particular case because the county doesn't have a permit to issue. We've already notified BioRecycling that we intend to have a public hearing on this issue. The public hearing will be at the point at which where we've incorporated, we've given opportunity for public notice, we've received comments, we'll have a meeting in the end of that comment, we'll propose if we feel that there are any further restrictions or additional conditions beyond what BioRecycling proposed in their site-specific land application plan. We'll propose those in draft form. We'll have a meeting at a venue like this. And then after the meeting, and we give BioRecycling will probably be asked to give a presentation on their site-specific land application plan. Then we'll have open a hearing. Hearings are kind of a formal process where you can testify. Your comments will be placed on the record. Ecology will respond, and the final result would be a permit coverage to BioRecycling. I should have mentioned at the very beginning, BioRecycling currently is under something called provisional coverage. The way the biosolids rule and program work is that once you're covered by the permit, once you submit the application for each iteration of the general permit thereafter, you're provisionally covered. You've met the standard of getting the application in. Now it's the department's responsibility to evaluate that application and to respond and work through the public process. And right now, we've been kind of hung up right in here. They submitted a checklist to me and staff. We've evaluated. We gave them some written feedback. We've met in person. We've expressed some concerns with the checklist. And so I'm working on drafting a response to that. And I'm still struggling. This is sort of a unique situation, and I'll get to it here, and you'll understand why I'm struggling. But it's my duty as a SEPA official to respond to that, give them my direction, and then once we get to a point where all the parties are satisfied, we may move forward we'll move forward with a public notice, which is typically we've done this in the newspaper. I'm not certain. I think in this case we were considering an alternate approach versus a newspaper public notice. We may instead use a website of yours or something, whatever we think with your help or anyone's help, the best way to get the word out to the concerned public.
Also, if you're on the interested parties list.
Yeah, the interested parties list. There's a red piece of paper back there. Thank you, Rebecca. So as part of a biosolids permit, there's something called interested parties. And anybody who is engaged in the process, who wants further information about it, if you sign your name and provide contact information, you become an interested party. That means through the application process, through any point moving forward in the next 5 years, if BioRecycling proposes any significant change to the process, you'll be notified by BioRecycling of that significant change. And so you'll have sort of a heads up. And if you sign up and provide that information on that red list, we'll put you on that interested parties list. So what I want to talk about that's kind of, I think, challenging about this particular situation is that those 8 or 9 wastewater treatment plants who are using BioRecycling for further treatment and for land application, that there really isn't a plan B for them. And that includes, I believe, all 3 of the public Mason County sites, Belfair, Russellwood, and North Bay.
Yeah.
Okay, so they don't have the ability, they weren't built in a way that they can produce Class B biosolids. They must send to another wastewater treatment plant who can further treat their material. But there are very few wastewater treatment plants that have the capacity to take those materials. They sort of were built, it appears, or in my view, designed anticipating that BioRecycling would exist and provide this service to the community. That's true for all those Mason County public facilities, as well as the half a dozen other facilities that occasionally avail themselves of BioRecycling. There's also the issue that I think 10 to 12,000 residences, is that what your estimate was? 12 to 15,000 residences who produce septage. BioRecycling provides a unique service in the 12 counties in the western part of the state. They have a facility here in Mason County, they have another facility in Lewis County. I think they get about 15 million gallons here. I'm not sure exactly the amount in Lewis, but I don't know if it's terribly different. And there isn't another private company that provides this service. And the wastewater treatment plants that can sometimes provide this service on a catch can basis, they can't possibly take the material as it's generated from people's homes. We want people to pump their septic systems and maintain them. Otherwise, you just get widespread area groundwater contamination issues. I believe if you sell your house, one of the requirements oftentimes is get your tank pumped. So if BioRecycling goes by the wayside and we can't figure out a way to make this a viable, environmentally sustainable business, then the community, Western Washington is frankly in a very tough predicament. Because there isn't system capacity, it just hasn't been developed. So that's kind of what most of these bullets. It's a very a unique business in Western Washington. Yeah, and it's particularly problematic, and I'll say this is where I'm really caught in the crosshairs for the SEPA checklist, is I'm struggling with the wintertime component of this. The whole idea here is you're applying nutrients to the crop, in this case pasture grass. Pasture grass, it's growing in the spring and the summer, as all of us are mowing recognize. The plants are uptaking those nutrients, not affecting the groundwater, and that's exactly the way biosolid's beneficial use is designed to work. And then the grass is either harvested by a combination of grazing, or in this case cuttings, and then those nutrients then go away, and you can reapply new stuff. The practice for biorecycling has been thus far that they apply biosolids all year around. During the wintertime, that whole process, is greatly reduced. The plants are barely growing. I think you get about 65 inches of rain in this community, so you're deluged with a lot of just natural precipitation. And so this is a component of the program that frankly we've been struggling, and we're developing a response to biorecycling is questioning the validity of a wintertime application program. And so the challenge is if our direction to do biorecycling is basically, you come back to us with what we call like a monthly water budget. You basically figure out how much water the crop needs in this area, and it comes out that it doesn't need any further irrigation or crop for 7 or 8 months of the year, where that material is going to go. And that's kind of where we're challenged, and we're in this kind of a tough spot. But we have a responsibility to ensure that this facility operates within the parameters of the law. The law says that 10 milligrams per liter is the maximum. You're not to exceed that in nitrates in the groundwater. They are exceeding that. They have been exceeding that. They propose some changes that they believe will lead to a reduction in that groundwater nitrate number. We have our own thoughts on some of that, and where we're doing is kind of working that out. When we get to a point, and I hope to be there at some point midsummer, where we have a proposal, that's when we'll go back to you as a community and throw that and present that to you in terms of final application, and seek your input on the approach that we've identified to find out whether you agree or disagree. So that pretty much concludes the technical component of our presentation. If you have any questions for any of the four of us, we'd be happy to do our best.
So I think that I want to call.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Simply because I am going to say this, that the people who, if I know that you live right near this site, or that you're a member of the club, I'm going to call on you first. So raise your hand. People have questions. No questions. Oh, Fred.
My question is, beyond nitrogen levels, what other cornucopia of contaminants are being monitored or have been found in the groundwater?
You have the aspect study?
Yeah, as far, the only thing that they looked at, well, actually I have a listing of it, let me get that for you.
I believe biorecycling tests for nitrates.
That's correct.
But Aspect did a more comprehensive part.
So they looked at, so they looked at temperature, the pH, specific conductance, dissolved oxygen, turbidity. Then they looked at calcium, iron, magnesium, manganese, potassium, and sodium. They looked at the bicarbonate alkalinity, the carbonate alkalinity, hydroxide alkalinity, chloride, sulfide, bromide, and then they went into ammonia as nitrogen, nitrate as nitrogen, nitrite, nitrite, total occasional nitrogen, phosphorus, fluoride, and then total organic carbons. So they were looking at those organics that are nutrient driven. Also anything, when you're looking at like salinity of water, pH of water.
So they don't look for anything like chemotherapy waste, anything radioactive, or
No, they
any
don't.
pharmaceuticals, is that correct?
No.
And that has been an issue in some metro or municipal water systems in the country?
In the country, yes. The problem with that is these are considered emerging contaminants. So we don't have any thresholds for those, either on a federal basis or even a state basis. Those are things where they're determining, one, whether or not they have the right methods for testing them, because they are new to us, and they're things that we're just learning about. So do we have the right methods for testing and analyzing those properly? Also, you have to look at the toxicology reports, whether or not the levels that we find are actually toxic to human beings, because these things are found, they're pretty ubiquitous in our environment, but depending on the level that they're at is whether or not they're harmful to us. Our instrumentation has gotten so good that we can detect things at such minimal levels, but detection does not indicate toxicity. So a lot of what has been studied in biosolids right now are looking at things like pharmaceuticals and where do they land on that spectrum. Now, we have nothing to gauge that by as far as a federal standard. However, we can look at it in comparison to something else. For example, ibuprofen has been looked at. How, do we find ibuprofen? Yeah, you find traces of ibuprofen in the biosolids. However, the amount of ibuprofen or the amount of biosolids that you would have to eat in order to just consume the equivalent of one ibuprofen is huge. I mean, absolutely huge. So, I mean, nobody would even consider consuming that. I mean, we're talking tons. And so you have, taking those things into perspective. So keep in mind that those emerging contaminants, the universities are studying those right now. We are fully aware of them. However, we need to take it into perspective as to whether or not they are posing a risk, and that's where the universities are stepping in, which is great because the federal government hasn't quite caught up to that yet. And all of our standards are based off of the federal government. So this is what EPA has done years and years of studies on, and this is what they determined needed to be looked at this point in time.
And I would add the 9 contaminants, pollutants that Kelsey identified in one of her slides was, I think, the result of the largest risk analysis or risk study that the EPA, federal government's ever conducted. And they looked at hundreds, if not thousands of chemicals and boiled it down to those 9, and they kind of modeled the worst case scenario of an individual who lives on a site where it's applied, who only eats food from that site, drinks milk from a cow that's raised on that site, every worst possible case scenario that couldn't possibly happen, and then determined that those 9 chemicals, and they have some measurable quantities, where that if you see that, that's where there's a concern, there's in table values. So, but there's also looking at newer chemicals as well.
Many of them. Many of them.
So, Carl?
Yeah, you said your concern was during the winter time when there's lots of rain. What if they were to create a large pond, pound bentonite in it so it doesn't leak out, and only allow them to spray during the drier season?
So what you're describing is a lagoon. Lagoons are very common in wastewater treatment business, and that's been an idea that BioRecycling has broached, and I think that they're contemplating. I don't know that I have a concrete thing, but I think it's something they're looking at in the not too distant future, and that would allow them to store the materials that they collect over the winter months and apply during the time of the year that would make most sense from an agronomic basis.
I did have a follow-up question. You said all the solids, they're only basically putting the liquids on the spray fuel. The solids are being transported to Pacific County, I think you said.
Lewis County.
Or
Well,
Lewis County.
actually, it's going to different places. There's some, I believe, what I heard today, some of the solids are going to central Washington to a permitted site there. I'm not sure if many of them, I think historically some may have gone to Lewis, but I think at the current time with their newest technology, it's going to central Washington.
So my question is, are those solids monitored for heavy metals and things like that?
The exact
before
same,
they're
they have the
applied?
exact same testing parameters as the liquid does, so, yes. They met the standards of Class B biosolids.
Yes.
Isn't there at a point, I've lived on the site for 40 years, and at a point where, before they were there, that the impact upon all of this on that particular 250 acres, 15 million gallons a year, doesn't that kind of exceed the amount of space that they have? I said it goes, like I said, it goes on all
So
day.
15 million gallons is a huge number, no question. And but one of the things you have to really think about when you think about the numbers, you have to think about the concentration of that number. Currently, the concentration is virtually nil. It's just water they're largely applying. Historically, that was not the case. And so there was definitely more nutrients, more nitrogen loading to the site. So numbers
Runoff
are
from the site isn't, I mean.
They are, if you're asking, has the site used up its capacity?
Well, in the prime time, this summertime, everything's working fine, and other than, you say, winter time, when we have a lot of runoff, and that's a valley that flows, right, it flows right straight to my house, right straight to my wellhead. And the runoff from that site, the past 20 years, it just flows. There's rivers flowing off the side of that hill. Where does it go? It flows right into the bog swamp that's in front of my house.
So one of the
water tests that happen there, I know that they test the water in the bog swamp, they test the water in my well and my other two neighbors' wells. We get the results back once a year, about a half a year after the tests have been done, but I don't know how to read those for levels of anything, but.
If you want assistance in interpreting that data, please, by all means, you feel free to contact us. We'll do that. We'll help you with that, no question. And part of this permit, that we'll be issuing or to the site may include additional wet monitoring wells if that's determined to be necessary.
Yeah, then it doesn't sound like they're going away anywhere because it's needed in the state to do what they're doing.
We need to get a grip on the groundwater problem. And we believe that there are steps that we can, further interim steps that can be taken to do that. But we need to resolve the groundwater problem.
Other sites that would be more preferable to do this on, or possibly?
Ecology doesn't choose the particular sites. That's up to, in this case, a private business who's identified a site, submitted an application to the Department of Ecology. We run through the lawful process of evaluating the site on the criteria and the law and the rule, and that's what we do. Are there other sites that could biosolids be applied to? Absolutely. And by all means, if somebody wants to go ahead and propose that to Ecology, we'll evaluate that and potentially issue a permit to them.
So, Andrea,
when you were talking about the studies that Aspect did, and you talked about calcium and a number of other things, but I didn't hear that they had monitored arsenic, cadmium, lead, mercury, other heavy metals. Did they do that?
Well, they tested the initial product, so the initial biosolids, but they didn't test the wells for any of those additional. So they tested the biosolids to make sure that they fit within the regulation for land application. But then, they did not test the wells for those, just the things that I listed off.
The way the program works is if the metals are below a certain threshold value, then there's not a need to sort of do that sort of calculation on an annual basis. And to my knowledge, BioRecycling is always, the material they receive has always come back, the analytic results, that it's below those values.
Yeah, well below, so.
Fred, you've already asked one, so Arlo, you have your hand up.
Is their application that's in process now, is that available to look at?
Absolutely.
Where it is
Public
on
information.
their website, or?
No, it's not available on the website. We will make it available on the website when we get too close to the public notice part, but if you want it now, you can contact my office. We'll make it available. But we, as part of the public notice process, one of the things we've started to do is we just create a unique website that sort of describes, we'll make any attachments and documents that a citizen might be interested in relevant to this thing, and we'll kind of put the details for the meeting and all that. And if you put your name on the red list, you will be notified.
And that website hasn't been created?
No, because we're not to that point, to be perfectly honest with you. But BioRecycling did submit to us a site-specific land application as well as some other documents, and those are public documents.
Ask a question. I've just got a simple question. I think it's simple. This organization has not met the standards. You're evaluating, they've applied for a permit, a re-permit. You're looking at it. Why don't you just, what are the remedies here? Can't you just say, okay, this is what you have to do, or you don't get a permit? And then I suppose they decide we're going to quit, or somebody else in there.
And we're in that process now. It's just complicated. But we're very much trying to do that.
You have an enforcement power, I assume.
Correct, we do. We do.
You're afraid of, if you force too hard, you're gonna lose the operator?
It's not a matter of being afraid to lose the operator. To be perfectly honest, BioRecycling has taken a lot of steps over the course of time since we've identified the problem to work and resolve the problem. I would probably be more interested in, or in a mind to put a penalty on them if I didn't think that they were willing and working with us on every step of the way. And so, unfortunately, none of these things have proven effective, but we've agreed with the steps they've taken. We think that they're the right steps. And so more recently, the concern is just, and BioRecycling may not agree with this. They may, if I tell them that they have to cease an application during the portion of the year, they can take me to court and appeal that if they have their own legal mechanism. And that's the process we're sort of talking about some of those details. So.
Is there some kind of a buffer zone that's required around the site of
Absolutely.
application? Because I imagine that, this is not a perfectly neat process to apply. How large is that zone, and do they lease that as well? How does it work?
Well, I'll let one of these experts here talk about what the standard is, but I'll offer that, and I don't know this off the top of my head. There's the minimum standard that the rule requires, and then you'd have to look in BioRecycling site-specific land application plan. And I know in one instance, for example, in the most recent iteration of the document, under that kind of that low area that Eugene had talked about, where the water tends to pond, they increased a much larger buffer than the federal and the state rules require. I want to say in the order of about 200 feet. But I may not be exactly on the number, but I think that's an example. But I'll let them describe, one of them describe what the standard says. But they may have gone more, that's all.
And is that just a zone of total non-use?
Correct. So, well, there's two caveats to that. So they have buffer zones. Everybody has buffer zones. Again, a minimum of 33 feet, but depending on the type of buffer. So you've got property lines, you've got to streams, you've got to depressions, you've got wetlands, roadways, so wells. So your domestic drinking wells, plus you've got any other ground wells that you may need to have buffers from. So when I talk minimums, it really is going to depend on what you're buffering. So for example, property lines, the property owner next door can ask for a larger buffer. That is not without, that's within your right to ask for a little bit. Now it needs to be within reason, because this is an agricultural production. Because what happens is when that buffer zone isn't used for, say, applying biosolids, they can turn around and apply anything else to that buffer zone. So if they need to go back through and plant or put down anhydrous, they can do that. So because that buffer zone now is no longer part of their biosolids permit, and so now they can come back through and do something else. But with domestic wells, it's no less than 100 feet from those drinking wells. From property lines, again, you've got anywhere starting from 33 feet to 50 feet. Your wetlands are going to be much greater, 100 to 200 feet. Lowland depressions, if they're not, year-round, containing water, if they're just seasonal, then that's going to depend on, well, how much water do they hold and for how long. So again, those are typically about 50 feet or greater. So it really depends on what you're looking at that particular site, but any of those are negotiable as well. So again, if it's a property line, you do have a right to talk with us and to them about what you feel comfortable with. And as long as it's within reason because they do have a right to agriculture, they do have a right to do this. So if it's within reason and you can make that agreement with them, then I've seen a lot of property owners change their buffers just to be good neighbors, so. Does that answer?
You mean too, so the buffer could be decreased as well as increased?
No, it cannot be decreased. There are these
increased.
minimums, yeah, and so the buffer zone could be increased, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
In relation to other sites in the state, do you consider this an ideal site, or do you think at some point it may be overused, or do you think it will be a perpetual site?
In terms of other sites, I mean, there are some sites, most agriculture that I'm aware of, and I'm not a farmer, usually are typically in lower areas adjacent to rivers where you tend to have more fertile soils. And they come with their own issues associated with it, you know, high groundwater tables and typically drainage into receiving waters. This site obviously doesn't have that. It's not with a traditional agricultural site. It's a forest, or was a forest. To that degree, it's not a normal site. But it is the site that the proponent proposed. Ecology doesn't tell them what site to propose or not to propose. We just make them try to operate within the law. So there's a second part to that.
Yeah, and we could certainly, you know, prescribe conditions that they need to do in order to meet those requirements, so that they don't overuse and can prolong the life of that facility.
So, the site capacity, maybe I think that's something you brought up. You know, I'm not yet convinced that this site has used up its total capacity. I do believe, and BioRecycling has reflected this in their most recent permit application, changes need to be made. They've made changes, they're proposing further changes, and we're discussing the extent and scope of those changes. And but if we reach a point where there aren't any more changes to be made and we still continue to have a groundwater problem, then the department will do what it needs to do in terms of terminating the permit.
You spoke of the wells being high in nitrogen, 2, 3 of the wells, those are on their sites?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
The offsite wells, I think the highest value I've ever seen is about 3, if that. And I think that was infrequent. They're typically in the 1 range, is what I want to say.
The nitrates?
Yeah.
The nitrates were, what, 14.1?
No, this is the offsite wells.
Oh, the offsite well, yeah, no, they were in the 2 to 3 milligrams per.
And I think it's the high values.
Yeah.
But what I think I recall was they do quarterly sampling. I seem to think that one season of the year, and I'm sorry I don't remember which one, it might get one of the wells might get approach 3, but I think typically the other 3 seasons they might be closer to 1.
They were trying to do, the reason of the wells being drilled was to try and determine the flow of the ground
I believe Mr. Hickey was concerned that he didn't, as I recall, his comment when he installed them was that he didn't want to impact the groundwater, or the drinking water rather, of the nearby residents.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's why he installed them. That was why. And
I thought that was part of the WIRA.
I don't think the offsite, I think the WIRA recommended some offsite wells, but Mr. Hickey, you know.
They were trying to determine where the subterranean water was.
Yeah, I don't think those were investigation wells. I mean, at that point, the purpose of those, the offsite wells, were just, my understanding was because Mr. Hickey's concerned that he didn't adversely impact the drinking water of the nearby residents.
Because there was 1 or 2 of them that did go dry.
I don't know if any of them went dry.
Yeah, there were several that were only seasonal, so there were several that
Those
went
are
dry.
the on-site wells, so correct?
Correct.
Not the offsite wells.
Still trying to figure out.
I don't know about the offsite wells. I don't believe the offsite wells have gone dry. I don't have that data in my head. Maybe
And you would expect to see some of those wells go dry during.
Fluctuate.
Yeah,
as the
well,
year-
it also with perched aquifers, and this is what I was talking about with the plinko type effect, because you get these lenses of impermeable materials where water comes down and sits on, and then just kind of gradually moves off and goes down deeper. And as, you know, if you have a well that comes down and is sitting on top of that perched aquifer, then, you know, as the water drains off that table, so to speak, then it will go dry, yeah.
Okay, local people, okay, Larry, you have
Are they limited to how many gallons that can be delivered there, and if so, who monitors that?
they're limited by the agronomic rate. Is that so? I think historically they proposed an agronomic rate. They've looked at the crop. I think this is based on field guides by Washington State University. It says you're growing pasture grass. Typically, I think plant available nitrogen about 120 pounds per acre is the proposed rate that the Washington State University Extension Office suggests. And I think that's what BioRecycling thus far has done. And so that is sort of the amount that they are supposed to apply. Again, at the end of the season, we ask them to go out, take samples of the soil, and then they measure the soil for the total nitrogen. And what they're doing is they're trying to figure out if there's a whole bunch of nitrogen there, then the theory is you apply too much in the previous spring. we're gonna go back and we're gonna reduce that agronomic rate, something lower than 120. If we don't find any nitrogen, oh man, the plants were starved for nutrients, and we can increase it. Is that?
That's correct. And we use that number, so the end of season number that we get from them, from their soil testing, we use that in the calculation for their next year's growing season.
And the facilities that send us send them the materials, well, I don't know about the septic facilities, but the wastewater treatment plants give us some values, and they give us analytical data that supports the concentration. And they're down to a point where, man, they've removed almost all the nitrogen from the material they're applying. I think our belief is the residual, the solids. I think our belief at this point is that the problem that we're seeing now is a residual from past practices, where you've got this thick layer of organic materials kind of stuck in the bottom 2 feet. And BioRecycling has planted in a couple of fields a different crop than pasture grass, alfalfa, I think. And the idea is that the alfalfa will consume a lot more of the nitrogen and suck that nitrogen out. And we'll find out next fall when they do soil nitrogen testing.
I just want to make sure I understood you. I saw your problems, you did a good job of pointing them out, what you're up against. Is there models somewhere else in the United States or other states that are hitting the same problem and knowing how to handle this, or are we unique in our dilemma? Yeah.
Well,
that's right.
I think the unique part here is, frankly, is that there's just unfortunately not any alternatives. I mean, you know, most wastewater treatment plants can either store it over the winter months, they can store it as a solid or store it as a liquid in a lagoon, as the gentleman over there inquired about, or they live in a climate, actually there's not really too many climates in Washington State that are suitable for wintertime application. So
other states do have a better ability, let's say,
well,
than we
if
do.
you have a season where you have agricultural in the wintertime, then that works well for you.
Right. And also, I think the uniqueness of this situation is how they handle the material, or how they're treating the material. So they're really separating the solids from the liquids. And so when they remove those solids, that's when the product becomes biosolids. They've treated it, they've removed it. What you see as a solid, it almost looks like a composted material. That to me is biosolids. And now they're treating the water as well as biosolids, because
that's what the rule says.
That's what the rule says. It has come in contact with biosolids, so therefore it is biosolids. And that's where we're coming into this issue, is them, you know, they're irrigating with it. And so that is the unique situation that we're up against, that it's not normally done that way.
So I think the literature that I've seen doesn't present a strong basis for irrigation in Mason County for maybe 6, 7, 8 months of the year. You get plenty of rainfall. There's no need, and you live here, you know this better than I do. So, and there's a water budget, sort of some process that we're going to be asking BioRecycling to go through. It takes a look at precipitation, it takes a look at these things and says, what are the months that the crop needs irrigation? And those are the months that we're considering having them focus the application season on.
I wanted to add a little something about your question right there. Another thing to consider here is none of these sites are, you know, one size fits all. I mean, they're all site specific and they depend on the geology and the climate, precipitation, and that sort of thing. So you have to take all of that into account. And so no one site is a perfect model for another one.
So,
isn't this sort of analogous to if you had a regional wastewater treatment plant that was receiving water and could no longer process due to population growth, and there would be a public discussion about expanding treatment because or maybe because the output is higher than standards for nitrate. So we get to that point and have this discussion, but the discussion hasn't been had because a private entity is receiving waste from a large area and no one is paying attention?
No, I mean, we issued an order in 2009, and I believe BioRecycling has spent millions of dollars in an attempt to resolve the issue, so I would say there's been attention paid.
Well, I mean, it's not on BioRecycling, it's on the general regional governance. Like,
So-
we had, there's a cliffhanger here.
Yeah,
Rates,
I
man.
so I would say nothing compels BioRecycling to provide this service to the community.
Right.
And I think if I get your point, it's a discussion I had with my regional director to perhaps engage with the county commissioners in a handful of counties, which is, you know, it seems to me that many communities have felt the responsibility to provide wastewater treatment services to Shelton has a wastewater treatment plant. Bellevue County has 3 wastewater treatment plants, but they didn't decide to treat their materials to the point where they could then, it meets the Class B standard, that they could maybe make a solid cake out of it and store it over the winter months, or they could send it to some other facility elsewhere. They're sort of, pardon? Or to treat septic, that's another thing. That's very rare, frankly, for a local government to provide septic services. But I don't know the exact numbers, but I suspect a number of folks in Mason County actually are on septic, probably the majority of folks are in septic systems. The Squaxin Island tribe are one of the entities that resend their material because I don't believe they can meet Class B standards, so they send it to BioRecycling. And if BioRecycling wasn't able to receive their material, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody else who could do that. Maybe Lot could, maybe not, but there's not 15 million gallons of capacity in the system, and unfortunately, the capacity is very hit and miss. The months that BioRecycling couldn't really be doing it is the very time of the year that wastewater treatment plants aren't so inclined to receive the material because they've got a ton of stormwater going through their system. So it doesn't really work very well.
Oh, I have a question. Are there other sites in Kitsap County that are processing?
Well, processing is the
Just like
so like BioRecycling. BioRecycling was what we call a beneficial use facility or septic management facility, and they have a special permit that allows them to receive these materials from other facilities. I'm not aware of any beneficial use or septic management facilities in Kitsap County. The city of Bremerton, I believe, has a land application site in the forest around Gold Mountain and a silvicultural site.
But they'll only apply their own material.
They're not allowed to accept material outside of city of Bremerton's. Now, what could happen, and I have no idea whether Bremerton has the capacity to do this, is an entity could send their material to Bremerton. Bremerton could then introduce it into their wastewater treatment system, basically further treat the material, and then include it on their site. But there's expenses, and that's all predicated on Bremerton's willingness to do so, their capacity to do so. These are things Kitsap County isn't a site that I currently work too much with. It's one of the things where we've talked about exploring and sitting down with them, but they don't have to do this. Their job is to provide services to the city of Bremerton, not to anybody else.
Yeah, I have a couple things. One is, I think it's Chelsea, right?
Kelsey?
Kelsey, I wrote it with a K. Can you explain to us what Class C biosolids is?
There are no Class C biosolids. You might be thinking about reclaimed water.
I don't know. It was on a document from your Ecology that said Class C, and I researched it and I couldn't figure out what it was.
Washington State doesn't recognize Class C for use. If a facility cannot meet either Class A or Class B, it isn't approved for land application. It can't be beneficially used, and it goes off to landfill. And so they're federally, EPA has got 4 classifications, A through D. That's correct. And depending on what type of material it is, they have certain specifications that it can be used or not used. But yeah, Washington State, we have chosen to only recognize the A and B, and that's the only material that can be used.
You will sometimes hear A referred to as EQ, which is technically
Class A.
A,
Yeah,
A, B has to do with pathogens. EQ would have to do with the pollutants.
So part of this question I have is about the process. The next step that you said, with the public process.
Yep.
Okay, at the public process, there's notification. The last time this happened 5 years ago, we weren't notified and we had signed up to be notified. How are we going to know for sure that that's going to be this time?
So what we've asked, I think,
The permit, we put our names in for the permit to be notified to have input on it, and we kept calling to find out if it had happened yet. And it was about, 8 months after we had first heard about it, they said it was already done. And there was no public
So I'm not sure if you're referring to the general permit that the state issues, or, because I do not believe BioRecycling received an individual permit in 2010. They were provisionally covered, and I don't think they ever received a final coverage individual permit thereafter. So you might be referring to the statewide general permit.
Okay, but we
and
were
I'm not sure.
confused at that point. I know of what permit we were even looking at.
Okay, and I
I mean,
apologize
it's
for
very,
that.
very complicated.
I apologize for that. What I think we're asking our applicants, our permittees to do is, and there's different ways, you know, we advise them that it's their legal responsibility to notify their interested parties, and we usually ask for some type of confirmation of how they've done it. Some have chosen to use certified mail so they can prove that they've done it. But in some cases, their interested parties may not have given them a physical address, they've given them an email address. So we ask them for confirmation that they have notified the parties. Sometimes people move, sometimes people's email addresses bounce back, but they can only use the means that are available to them. And all I can tell you is that we'll take the same steps this iteration. We'll confirm that they've done it. So it's in our best interest that it gets, you know.
The other thing is, you guys are probably aware of the new report that just came out, I think, last week about the pharmaceuticals that they've done throughout the country and the Northwest, and they're doing by Washington DC, and there's a whole strip, and you know, all the different ones that are, and our whole thing that I think that everybody here is concerned about is our water, meaning our drinking water, meaning the salt water for our salmon and the shellfish and everything else. And from what my understanding was at the last time that I was here with this is you believe that the water doesn't go so much towards the canal, that it went towards Oakland Bay. That's what it said. It goes into Cranberry Creek, Lake Limerick, and then Oakland Bay. And then 20%, I guess, was going towards Hood Canal. So there's a couple of issues here that I'm concerned about the winter. And you talk about so much water. There's a thing that happened that, can't remember the guy's name, from Department of Natural Resources. He was talking to us about a backward, kind of a flip. And I mean, I'm talking to hydrologists, I guess, when I'm saying this, but normally water direction will go one direction, a directional flow, but when there's so much water that comes down around the Hood Canal, it actually starts going the opposite direction and water starts shooting out opposite. And he was talking to us about what an interesting phenomena it was. But in any case, I'm just wondering about how much consideration goes into things like Clean Water Act violations and that sort of thing, because it is getting into the salt water, whether it's through Cranberry Lake and Cranberry Creek. I've got kids that live on a little stream that goes between those two. It's right on their property. And, you know, there's all these considerations. And, I mean, I'm hoping that the people, besides, we have a protection of trying to keep this business because there's a need for it, but there's also the health and benefits that way exceed in a lot of different directions.
Ecology absolutely agrees with you, and that's why we're asking for some changes, and the facility has made many, and we're asking for additional. Again, the whole concept here is you're applying just enough of this nutrients that the plant that they're growing uptakes it, and it doesn't allow it to get to the groundwater. And that's what we're working hard to achieve, that state right there. And we acknowledge that it hasn't got there yet, and that's what we're working to make some changes on.
So that's exactly what my question was. What happens to the plant uptake? What do they do with those plants and the cattle that you said were grazing on the plants?
They grow haylage, is that the right term? Yeah. They grow haylage right now, the cattle are grazing on it.
Does it have the nitrogen in it?
Yeah, and that's the nitrogen, that's what the animal wants, that's the energy.
That's what the plant wants too. So when they're cutting, like when it's bright green, and they're cutting the hay or they're cutting the alfalfa, that's when the plant has the absolute most amount of nitrogen in it.
And that's what the farmer's looking for.
It's like when you're putting fertilizer on your lawn and to green it up.
Yeah, well, I don't do that.
Well, some people do, and it can be a problem if you don't do it right. But that's the process.
But is that harmful when it goes into animals and plants and we consume it?
No, and we need nitrogen. I mean, it's part of our DNA, so we do need nitrogen. The animals also need nitrogen, so that's why plants when they're at their ripest, that is when they have the most amount of nitrogen in them, and so that's the optimal time.
I
I'm not a farmer, so.
I believe Haley silage, one of the things, they send it in for a laboratory analysis to determine that optimum amount. I think farmers are very interested in getting that maximum energy yield. And that's also the very thing that's preventing the material from getting, the nitrates from getting to the ground.
But I don't think the cattle are tested, are they? No, they're not.
No.
You test the hay, test the hay, don't you test the cow?
Right.
Yeah.
What happens to the plants after? I'm confused.
So it's a crop.
Right.
So they need to, the crop in this case is pasture, well, and some alfalfa, and they'll feed it. It'll be animal feed. They'll either graze, there's some cattle grazing on the site. I think I saw some horses today. And then they also bale it and sell it to nearby farms.
And that goes with any, I mean, not just applying biosolids as a fertilizer, but that's any fertilizer that you're gonna put down. I mean, the farmers are looking for that optimum nitrogen efficiency that they can get for those plants.
They've been applying this on the land since 1985. That's 30 years. And if you go by the figure you gave of how many gallons that is a year, that comes out to 462 million gallons that have been poured on the ground. And how can that not reach a saturation point? And this is a wonderful question. Are the aquifers underneath there? And even though it would be a slow process of infiltrating in there, isn't it a dangerous thing to have going? And the other thing is, of all of this going down into Oakland Bay, which is contaminated as it is from the mill throwing everything in there with dioxin and that, it's gone past its prime. And when the EPA, in their wonderful idea that we'll find a way of getting rid of this problem, we'll call it biosolids and make it friendly for putting in the ground. It's not working anymore. They have been above the limits on that from 2008 to 2012. They exceeded that 10 parts per liter. When you start multiplying that, what happens to all this that still remains in there? Nobody ever talks about that. When you get 10 milligrams per liter, and what happens? Does it just disappear after a while?
Nitrates are it's very leachable. So as the
It has to go somewhere.
it goes down to the aquifer, and I think the water time of travel in this case, according to the aspect study, was fairly slow.
It percolates really slow through the tills.
So
This is 30 years they've been
it's
doing
30
this.
years, and again, optimally, the plants are uptaking the nutrients, and it's not getting to the groundwater. We can see that that's not been the case, so we're working hard to resolve that.
And it's not going to be the case, because it's full. You can't take it.
Well, you grow new grass every year, so the plants have a crop of nutrient need every single year.
No miracle has occurred that all of a sudden it's taking up all this nitrogen. And nobody wants to admit that this thing is past its prime. Something new has to be developed, and nobody wants to challenge that. They always want to wait until it becomes a catastrophe. And then they say, how did this happen? Why did we let it go so long? And that's where we're at right now.
So, did you want to ask a question?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I'm not.
Anyway, I started monitoring this, about 10 years ago, and Hickey, he impressed me as being very concerned, and but he was always throwing out the thing that, you want me to shut it down, I'll shut it down. But as you say, there's no alternative. So he knew what he was saying there. But my big problem with it is, it's all state permitted. The county's not involved. And I've gone to the county and they all know the state took that over, we're not in that loop. I think that's wrong. The county government needs to verify what you're doing and agree with it and sign off to it. Because the people in this county, if this all turns sour, through the years, we're gonna be stuck with the people that, I mean, this company will go away, the people that are drinking the water may get sick, they may not be able to live there because they can't get water out of the ground that's safe, they're stuck.
If Mason County is interested, we can arrange for a delegation agreement and allow Mason County to review any of these materials. And we're happy to do that. We do that with other counties.
Yeah, we encourage the counties to participate
But
and be
they're
involved.
not willing to.
Most of the time not, and they have the ability to have delegation, which means that they sign an agreement with us, letting us know that these are all the things that we want to cover, and then they take charge.
Well, like I say, I'm not picking on.
No, I
Person
know,
County
I know,
Commissioners
but
that 10 years ago, they
In the
didn't have
absence
to.
of a formal agreement, I would still provide this. I contacted Debbie about tonight.
Exactly,
So,
and we
anyway.
encourage them to, but we don't get a lot of county feedback. And this is across the state, this isn't just here.
And a lot of county governments don't have the resources to hire all of the technical expertise.
Very complicated. He's a hydrogeologist, professional license. They don't think Mason
I
County.
understand that
Yeah.
part, but they still need to be able to sign off on it somehow, that they're partially
We
responsible.
would love and we encourage their input, and we will welcome that at any point in the future. And we won't move forward without contacting the health department and asking for their input.
But as far as the pharmaceuticals go, I mean, there's more and more studies saying that it's affecting the fish in the salt water, it's affecting the humans in their drinking water. I think since you don't have standards, at the very least, I think you need to start testing for it and compiling database for it, so that when standards come up, you're not chasing your tail, you know that this area has been affected or has been okay.
But this is also part of the problem. We'd love to have a set amount of items to test for, but the tests are super expensive. So to ask a wastewater treatment facility to test, 50 to 100 chemicals that may or may not be in there, I mean, that's a huge financial burden that we'd be placing on them. So that's another part of the problem.
But when people get sick, that's a huge financial burden on everybody.
Yeah, and another part of the problem too is that, these pharmaceuticals in the water just aren't regulated. And so there's no authority to mandate any kind of testing. And it's not that we wouldn't like to do that, it's just that, we have our own requirements that we have to follow.
Like everything else, it's money good.
Complain to EPA.
Can you speak to the effect of, let's say, Shelton treatment plant, their outflow, does that go into Oakland Bay?
I presume so, but I don't regulate shelter wastewater.
Or like Alderbrook?
Well,
Their outflow goes into the canal.
Generally speaking, Belfair is an exception that I know of, and that doesn't mean there are not others. But most wastewater treatment plants have an outflow that go to a receiving water where they meet a daily standard and it gets those dilution factor. Belfair is sort of unique in that they're located inland and they actually have an infiltration basin, I believe, as I recall when I was there. And I think if your point is that wastewater treatment plants, wastewater comes in, they process the wastewater, they treat the wastewater, they remove solids, and then they discharge wastewater, and at some point there's some receptor of that, and that's absolutely true.
And what kind of standards do they have to meet?
They have daily standards, I don't have those memorized.
It's through the NPDS, so that's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. You thank the feds for that one.
But they all have their own permits.
They have their own permits, so they need to get permitted through Ecology for that discharge. And then they have a huge amount of standards that they have to meet. So anywhere from pH to total solids being discharged, and then a gamut of metals and
The larger the wastewater
Do
treatment
they have to
plant,
meet a certain class?
yes,
Like
they
a Class
do.
A, where it's sterilized?
So the
or-
sterilized one, that's their reclaimed water. And that water is almost as good as, if not as good as your drinking water, literally. And then anything below that, but there is a threshold standard that they can't discharge unless they meet this absolute standard.
But they are taking stuff to Webb.
well, there's 8 or 9 of them, they're identify, I think, maybe Yelm being a notable exception, and maybe they're fairly small, but most of them are really small facilities.
So Carl, did you have another question?
I just want, so the only non-compliance with this plant is that there's 3 test wells that are exceeding the 10 threshold and they're just barely exceeding it?
No, I wouldn't say that they're just barely. I mean, the standard's 10, and I think ones have been around 14 or so. And I think there's a lysimeter on the site that's had values as high as 35. We don't have standards for lysimeters, so
No.
but it's a data point. And,
So how deep are the test wells, and do they exceed the standard in the growing season or just in the winter time?
So the tests that they took were in, I have it, they were in May.
Yeah.
And they're only, I believe, they were 3 feet deep? I believe they were only 3 feet deep.
What, the lysimeters?
No, the wells.
No, the wells go down 100.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, 100
and they,
feet.
I believe,
So the lysimeters.
those wells, the real problem well, I think it shows exceedances every quarter as I recall. I look at the data, I'm not the professional hydrologist, but I look at it and I think it's consistently above and has remained above. The numbers actually were pretty high, they definitely dropped, and then they kind of plateaued, and there was even a last few quarters where one of them sort of seemed to be kind of either trending up or it's just concerning. We were making progress with all the steps BioRecycling was doing. We thought we were on the right track, and then I would say about the last 2 years, things plateaued again, and that's why we stepped in and said, we got to make a drastic change.
Yeah, and those tests were done in May, the end of May.
I think you're referring to the aspect studies, but,
Yeah,
but BioRecycling does quarterly samples.
Yes, they do.
Quarterly samples, so.
And those exceed all, the ones that are exceeding, they exceed it year-round, all 4
I believe
quarters?
for certain one of them does, that's my recollection, this data is all publicly available.
Some of them have gone down under the threshold.
Some have gone under, and I'll be honest, the threshold's 10, and if they come back at 9.8, I'm still having this conversation with BioRecycling. That's a concern. I don't know what that number is. I think water quality uses 5 as a number where they start to have a trigger, an action point. And so if I saw something 5 or greater, we would be having to sit down and we got to change this. This is not a trend that we want to see. Our goal is to get everything below 5.
So Joe, I saw your hand up.
I may have missed this. Do they do all their own testing, or do you ever go out and test it yourself?
Well, they hire a consulting agency, I believe, or a consulting firm. I think Pacific Groundwater Group does their testing. It's for groundwater. They have another group, a soil scientist, a certified soil scientist, go out and sample their soil. And so we have been on site, I know, for the soil. I don't know if we've been on site, in my recollection, for the groundwater sampling. The samples are collected, they're then submitted to a laboratory who has their own accreditation, so.
Separate entity then?
Separate entities.
Fred, you're crazy.
So I think it's been pretty well demonstrated that the system is designed to remove nitrogen from the waste components. And it has trouble removing some of that nitrogen deeper in the soil layers below 2 feet because the roots don't reach that from the crops. So my question is, I mean, the system works, or at least it's plateaued in its ability to contain the contaminants that are brought in, or the nitrogen that's brought in. I think the concern remains that there's other contaminants coming in that we don't see, they're not monitored very often. So my question would be, if it's cost prohibitive to do all the testing, would it be a good idea maybe to increase the frequency of testing in frequency as far as how often they're done, but also in the range of things that are tested? And if it's cost prohibitive, maybe to do it in partnership with the universities that are already trying to develop methods for contamination levels and testing procedures or whatever.
You want to try it? I think universities can and do this type of testing throughout Washington. I don't know that it's happened at this site.
Yeah, but they could certainly do that in agreement with a facility. They get some kind of access agreement. As far as the frequency goes, you can oversample something and get data that starts to become meaningless.
There's another challenge at this site, and it kind of gets to the soil testing. Typically, I think, and maybe you two will have a better explanation than I, but typically it's done with like some type of hand auger or shovel that they're able to take a core sample that works pretty well. This site, the soil is very rocky, and I believe it's made those attempts to sample that way. I think what they do is they go out there with a backhoe and dig a pit, and I think the soil scientist steps in the pit and sort of does a sidewall sample. And the facility has expressed frustration that they feel that the samples themselves, that might be leading to some of the high numbers, these professionally high numbers, that residual number. And I'm not sure that we agree or disagree, other than we would consider it an alternate soil sampling approach, but they haven't identified one. I do know Mr. Hickey contacted a professor or Dr. Cogger from Washington State University with that question, and Dr. Cogger's opinion was he didn't have a better suggestion, because that was forwarded on to us. I mean, there's been some thought and consideration, and if anybody has any ideas, I think everybody would be willing to consider them, but that's one of the challenges.
A question about self-monitoring. I live and go back and forth on that road all the time, and there's an incredible amount of trucks. A lot of them are the double trucks that are not labeled. I don't know, there's not a requirement evidently when you're hauling biosolids to label the truck at all, because they're absolutely not. They could be hauling milk, but they're all pulling in there. My thing about ecology, and if there's a real concern that this guy's not meeting standards, I think that the numbers of trucks and the amount of gallons and everything else might not be accurate. You know, it just doesn't, I don't know what the public can do. I mean, we've actually thought about sitting and counting trucks before, but I don't know what you do with that information.
So I believe there's a checks and a balance here. So the generating wastewater treatment plants, they have to submit to us how much they sent them. So BioRecycling reports how much they received. The wastewater treatment plants tell us how much they sent. I think the septic pumpers, they don't report to us, but I think they report to counties. Is that accurate?
Correct.
So there is a checks and balances in this whole thing. And those numbers, Kelsey once had a job where she sort of compiled that for statewide. And you do look at it. There may be minor differences because there are estimates on the volume of a truck, but think anything outside of a comfort zone, they pursue that.
So have you been out there during a really rainy time, you personally?
I've been out there a few times, and I haven't been out there. I went out there this afternoon, and it's been a number of years since I was last out there. So I don't. It was rainy, I think, when I was there last, but it wasn't extraordinarily so.
I'm just going to throw this out there because I think that it should be done during a real bad rainy time. Someone go stand on the road that's really. You'll know where we're at, because if the driveway is here, it would be up the road just a little bit. You'll see a big culvert. And it's kind of where the hills come down. Anyway, during the real rainy time, the water absolutely shoots. I mean, the whole stream across the road going straight out. If you stood straight at the lake is right out where it's going. So that water is going off property, and I'm sure that it's contaminated with whatever's on the property. So
I'd like to address that a little bit. I'm new to the program. I just started here last month. So I am coming up to speed on this particular facility and a lot of other ones. But I do plan on getting out and looking at some of these operations so I can get a better understanding of what's going on at the facilities. I do know that we've had hydrogeologists out at that particular site during the wet season. I couldn't tell you whether it was pouring down rain or not, but they've been out there during the wet season and looked at the operation, and so we are aware of how they operate and what kind of volumes you can see, and you know that's one of the concerns that I do have when I look at this particular site because of the shallow soils. They have only so much capacity in them. You know, and whether we've actually figured out what the right volume is, it is a trial and error basis for, you know, agricultural application at that sort of thing. But, you know, we're working on that, and we're working to make sure that we're providing, you know, we're giving the best information we can on the site so that we feel good about issuing that permit.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I have a request. My name is Brian Hickey. I'm Roger Hickey's son. I'm operation manager at the North Ranch facility. And given the opportunity, I can maybe answer a few questions. that you had specifically keeps the groundwater flowing off the site. Is that acceptable?
I first want to see, does anybody have any more questions of what I call the regulators that are here tonight? Okay. Yeah, just wait.
It sounds like ideally, you guys could figure out the capacity of the crop to take up the nitrogen based on the application rate. Is there any indication yet that of what that capacity is, and if it is close to what the application rate needs to be, and B, if not, the alternatives that you said, like storing over winter so that you're not applying when the crops aren't growing. Infrastructure-wise, is there any indication that those are realistic in your talks with biosolids?
Yeah, I mean, so far when BioRecycling's proposed various options, I mean, I'm not sure that I've got an exact date or a precise commitment. I think the conversation acknowledged building a lagoon, I think on the order of 15 million gallons is a big undertaking. It's expensive, it's a lot of work. It involves Department of Ecology permitting. If you sign your red list, you will be notified when any permit regarding the lagoon is created, so you can weigh in on your comments on that. So it's an extensive and it's complicated, but I think that I sense that they're looking at it. I don't think that's the only option. I think they've looked at some other options in hauling potentially to a wastewater treatment plant who can handle their effluent. I think that might be on the table.
There is a report that we have for the lagoon, a planning report, I believe.
Okay.
So.
And then I was going to say about your I think your comment about the plant needs. It's complicated. So they've changed crops. They've gone from, at least on a couple of the fields, they've gone from pasture grass to alfalfa with the intent that they think that that'll consume more of the entrained organic material and nitrogen. It's also the method of application. I mean, I think they're using the big irrigation guns at the moment. I believe in a conversation with an agronomist that they hired, he proposed some different means of applying the material. And again, that can impact the end result as well, versus a whole lot of, like watering with the drip system versus your sprinklers. The idea being is if you can meter it in at a very, at a rate that the plant can uptake it, it's a much higher consumption rate. So there's a lot of things, variables in play.
So, you have another one? Okay.
Oh, sure. Drinking water. Okay, I live on the other side of the canal. It doesn't concern me. However, it does concern me that there are people on this side drinking the water out of their wells in the ground. On our public water systems, the state requires, I think it's every 3 years, they do heavy metals, all sorts of metal testing on certain of the homes, mine's one of them. It would seem to me, since you're releasing so much of unknown products, you really have no idea what they're spraying out there, that every single well around this area that this thing can drain to should be tested annually, or at least every few years, for heavy metals and stuff, and see what these people are being exposed to, and is it increasing? Then you have data if it's changing.
So I guess I would disagree that we do measure for the 9 pollutants of the material, and including 8 metals and selenium, I believe, are the 9 pollutants. And they came up with those 9 pollutants after looking at thousands of chemical compounds to see which ones are likely to present themselves in any significant degree in this material. So there's a tremendous amount of data and research that goes into those, identifying those 9 contaminants, and BioRecycling tests the material before they land the plant to make sure that they meet those standards. So I think there's been some conversation about some new emerging contaminants, and I would acknowledge that further research is necessary, and Ecology encourages that. Ecology is trying to work with universities. Other states are. We're trying to, I think Rebecca was at a conference trying to encourage the EPA and others. It's a nationwide effort to continue. We need to keep looking at it.
I just had a question about timeline. When you think a hearing might happen, in the fall, or summer, or, I mean, what are we?
It's really on me. I owe BioRecycling a response to their SEPA. I anticipate getting that out in the next few days. So I think that the hearing, and I'll have to, again, you'll have to put yourself on sign up on the red list. We'll just notify you. At this time, I think the hearing is likely to occur probably, you think August is? We have to publicize the hearing for at least a minimum of 30 days. So it'll, whichever way we do it, be it in the newspaper, be it a website, be direct mailings, you'll have 30 days to say on day 31, day 32, there's going to be a hearing at such and such site during such and such times. And then we generally like to keep the comment period open for another week or so because we like people to be able to come to the meeting with an open mind and the hearing and listen to some stuff. And maybe they don't think of something that night, or maybe they like to, instead of standing up and testifying orally, they like to write or put their thoughts on paper. So it generally takes around 40, 45 days from start to finish. So there's at least a 30-day lag between the date at which we direct BioRecycling to put that notice out there and or direct mail everybody.
Okay, Terry.
Oh, how about Seth first?
Seth, she's gonna.
I have a couple questions. What is the point of compliance for the permit for groundwater for the 10 milligrams per liter?
The point of compliance is the groundwater.
Is the groundwater?
Yeah, there's not like a landfill. It's not. It's the perimeter of the site. It is at the ground, at the interface of.
So it has exceeded those.
Yes, it has.
And then you show that the aspect report showed that the southwesterly groundwater flow pattern at a very slow angle at this point at the site.
Correct.
It could potentially curve towards the Skokomish towards the north, and then also steepen and increase.
Well, it's following the topography of the land, basically, right. and the that confining layer that I talked about. There is a Skokomish down there. That's exactly where it's heading. You know how it interacts with the river. I don't know if the confining layer is between the riverbed and the aquifer. I haven't seen any information on that yet. So, you know, if there is some interaction there, it may be limited.
Do we know when the groundwater will reach the Skokomish, or an estimate of timing, and also where?
I haven't seen any estimates, but from our discussions on the site, I understand we're talking years. Because
tens of years or years?
I believe when we have a hearing or a meeting, we'll ask BioRecycling to have their experts, or they can just address this. I believe they've done some dating of the time and travel estimates, and I think the aspect study went into that. And I'm dangerously interpreting something. I'm not a licensed hydrogeologist, but I think the water traveled quite slowly, and that it was
at the site.
Leaving it could the groundwater
speed up.
I seem to recall there were estimates that had many decades.
The upper aquifer moves fairly quickly. I think it's in the range of about, you know, anywhere from 8 to 10 inches a day. It could move through the soils. Now, when you're talking about the tills, you're talking about you know, fractions of an inch per day longitudinally, and even greater travel times downward. So, yeah, we're talking probably in the neighborhood of decades.
Okay. The groundwater wells that are off-site, are you guys measuring water levels on those sites?
Yes, they are.
Continuously?
No. Not that I'm aware of. I haven't seen it.
Yes, there's a data logger.
There's a data logger? Okay.
In your well, but not in those off sites that are in between your well and the site?
I don't know.
Because they're along Webb Hill Road?
There's 3, I believe, off-site presently. And certainly, my experience with water testing, which isn't great, is that you generally test the volume as well as take the sample. But
well, with the groundwater,
the data will
you
show.
can tell the slope.
Oh, yeah. And I believe they've correlated and I do recall seeing the transducer graph now. They also calibrate it to just the other wells by sampling with a water meter too, so that they do it manually, and then they can relate the transducer data to the other wells too.
Okay. I guess just something to say is that the United States Geological Survey is looking at doing some groundwater work here regionally in the near future. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that. This would be of interest it's with the Conservation District. And so that might be something also to look into. Thank you.
So were you looking at the aspect report about the years? Because I think that they did estimate the years in the aspect report, number 2.
Was it number 2? Yeah, I was looking through those for that number. I know that it was like 0.002 feet per feet but how that translated to, it was almost like 41 years of
But then
travel
how many
time.
years have we already been in that?
Correct.
That was the question, yeah.
So however long they've been operating at this point.
So that might be interesting information to put out as a public meeting about, so the people who have wells in that direction. So Terry?
So I just want to do one quick public service announcement. Remember that you can turn in your prescription and non-prescription medications at Fire District 4 and at the Sheriff's Department. Please don't flush. I don't care if you're on a sewer or on a septic system. I think the other option is, one of the things we need to think about is we have to operate and maintain our septic systems, and it needs to go somewhere. And I think everybody's trying to make sure it's going to the right place, and that the facility is treating it properly. And I think that they've really been working hard, and it seems like they're trying some new crops and some new distribution methods, etc. But something that Herb said made me think a little bit, and one of it is we have a sewage treatment plant in this community that is totally under capacity and is having challenges, and this might be a perfect place for a public-private partnership. That maybe we could add a new cell, a new wing, if you find that they would have to shut down at some point. Maybe there is something in terms of this public-private partnership that could occur at that facility. It would definitely help with the debt, but also provide that facility to maybe work a little bit better and be a win-win for our community, because this does need to go somewhere, and we need to know where it is, and it needs to be handled safely, and I think everyone agrees, the operator, Ecology, and everyone in this room. And so how do we do that? That's the key. And so it might be something to consider in a big picture, out-of-the-box type thing to look at.
You're talking about the bill.
Yeah, I'm well aware, I've been to Belfair, I'm familiar, and I understand some of the financing issues. I talked to my regional director about the idea of approaching the Mason County Commissioners, and some of our concerns, and I mean, it's difficult in Mason County, and I believe the septic guys are probably their clientele from East Pierce, Mason. I suspect they get septic guys from Thurston and Grays Harbor and a variety of counties, so it's not just Mason County, but they all do that, and maybe there's an understanding or a realization that we need to provide some services, some community service, public services to manage septage, or maybe, and these unfortunately come with costs, but it's also further treat our own wastewater that are hooked up directly to the wastewater treatment plants to the point where they can meet the Class B standards.
So before I call Mr. Hickey, one thing that we have discussed is, and it's come up here tonight, I go, you need a plan B for almost anything. And we don't seem to have a plan B. And it seems like this is an essential service, and we should be approaching it almost regionally. It's just as important as the transfer station, as transportation and everything else. So I would really encourage Ecology, it needs to be done all over the state, that we plan for into the future these sites. And if some site isn't working well, then it can go someplace else, or even better places. I can't believe we're still flushing the toilet with water, and why we haven't created a new technology or something to deal with our poop, because everybody poops. That's a good. Okay, so Mr. Hickey, and it is 8:05, but go ahead.
I'll be quick. I wasn't formally invited, but I was very interested to attend. And I was very interested to hear the community concern of the issues, and frankly, I'm very happy with what I heard and feel like hopefully a lot of your questions were answered by Ecology. I want you to know our perspective from BioRecycling. is that the site remains sustainable, that pollutants don't enter the groundwater, don't leave the site, and we comply with Ecology's regulations. As Peter mentioned, we've invested a lot of money, closed down the Pacific site to take less material at our Shelton facility in an effort to reduce soil nitrates and nitrates in the groundwater. That's just one of many steps that we've taken and will continue to take. If the site can't be sustainable because there's some scientist credible that says you're polluting the groundwater, it's going off site, or we can't correct the numbers in the monitoring well 1 specifically, which is in the center of our site, then obviously it's not sustainable. What do we need to do to fix it? Maybe application has to cease there. But I personally believe that with the new steps we're taking in cropping, we can get a lot of the nitrogen that's there in the soil in the form of organic nitrogen, which we've not eliminated applying with the dewatering, but we've reduced greatly the amount of organic nitrogen that goes out on that site now. But we can grow that out through cropping and haying, and that's what I've been spending a lot of my time doing there. So I just want to take an opportunity to introduce myself. I imagine we'll see each other again in the hearing, and let you know my perspective. I heard your concerns about what's going into the site, how we know what it is. They have to report it. We see it. We have an operator there that sees it. We have actually turned loads away because they appear too thick. They contain too much grease. There's limits on the amount of grease. And any of that stuff, like if you get a load of grease trap and it goes out on the field, it kills the vegetation. It's counterproductive to what we want to do. We limit it. I turn away treatment plants who want to send us waste with a high % solid. It screws up our dewatering equipment. We want to be able to put out the water to fertilize the plants, not exceed the fertilization, and actually go under agronomic levels so that we can pull more nitrogen out of the organic nitrogen that's already there, more nitrates. And if you want to count trucks beside the road, you're welcome to. You're welcome to come up to the site, and I personally will give you a tour and show you what we do. And you can see for yourself if you'd ever like to. You're welcome. Is there any quick questions? All right, thank you.
So I think that concludes. Any other questions? Okay, that concludes. It was a good 2 hours, huh? Okay, so our questions will even be more. Thank you all.